Welcome. My name is Hilary Carter. I have the pleasure of hosting our session today on Fueling Cloud Native. We're here to discuss the data that we do have in the community that's available to you, and also I'd love to hear from you about the data that we need. To introduce myself and the function that I lead at the Linux Foundation, I founded LF Research 4 years ago at the LF. I was hired specifically to set up the research function so that we would have a collection of insights, data of a different kind, a data repository of a different kind that would help fuel strategy and decision making. So that was a dedicated effort based on a history of having conducted studies over the years, but realizing that those studies were rather valuable in helping empirically measure what was taking place in open source, whether it was from the perspective of developers or industry needs or other kind of trends. And since our establishment, we have a library of 78 unique studies. And I'm happy to say that all of that data is available for you and your organization and your use. And you're welcome to explore the data sets. They're available on a platform called data.world. All you have to do is log in and access some of the survey data that we have used, some of the vendor data that has been contributed to our study. But we publish our data under Community Data License Agreement 2.0. It's an open source license that governs data sharing. And it's a license that I encourage organizations to familiarize themselves with, because as we go about building products and solutions, particularly in the context of AI, this is a really helpful license. So very briefly, I hope that you'll join me in sharing some of the data challenges within your organization and your wish for specific data sets that would add value as it relates to your organizational strategy, your project community strategy, and help you get the buy-in from decision makers at your organization. So this library of research that we've created is essentially Convince My Boss. This is your utility to explore and use as it relates to sharing internally with people who are not necessarily technologists, and maybe some of them are not familiar with open source at all, but they have decision-making over your travel budget. They have decision-making over your hiring. They have decision-making over other things. So having empirical evidence that measures the trends in open source, from usage of open source, which projects are most widely used, what are the contribution trends, what's the value of contribution, and where is the activity and velocity taking place, within which projects and within which industries. Why are organizations who are fierce competitors coming together within these communities and creating shared values? So that's really what this is all about. Part of the way we've gone about analyzing open source, because it's so broad, the Linux Foundation hosts more than 1,000 different projects. And so how do we measure what's taking place and try to get a sense of the different trends? So we conduct research using 4 different frameworks. The first is an industry-specific analysis. And just this week, we published a new industry report under LF Research for the networking industry with our umbrella community, similar to CNCF, but it's specific to networking and mobile. It's called LF Networking Foundation. We've also done industry studies within healthcare and within financial services. The second framework is looking at technology domains, what's taking place in cloud native, what's taking place in AI, what's taking place in edge and IoT, for example. The third way we analyze our community activity is by looking at geographic analysis. What's taking place across different regions? What's happening in Japan that's different from another country? What's happening in Europe? Why is Europe unique? And what are the unique needs within the European market? How are they different from North America and the rest of the world? We have studies specific to Japan, which simply has a different approach and is at a different stage in terms of its modernization. What does Japan need that is unique? And so that's driven some of our geographic efforts. And then finally, we look at cross-industry, cross-discipline, cross-domain issues, things like developer relations, diversity, equity, and inclusion, cybersecurity, standards, things that affect all industries and all domains together. So all of our research can be found at linuxfoundation.org/research. I'll share a QR code a little bit later. So let me take you through some of the data that we have. A lot of it is specific to CNCF and cloud native community that I think is really helpful, and I'd love for you to explore some of these data sets and see how you can also engage in these reports. Just Tuesday, the press release went on Tuesday, our 2024 numbers around what's taking place in cloud native, really capturing the decade of velocity, a decade of code, cloud, and change, and really illustrating the maturity of the cloud native ecosystem. The high level of adoption, 89% cloud native adoption figures, the fact that Kubernetes is definitively ubiquitous and really dominates the conversation. Here we are at a conference named after this very project. The fact that organizations are releasing code at a faster pace is an example of some of the insights that the report created. And how GitOps principles and other types of approaches to using CI/CD is increasing year over year. So these are some of the trends that you'll find in our 2024 study that just came out this week. Last year, Kubernetes turned 10, and on this occasion, we decided to better understand what Kubernetes means to its contributors and to the world at large, and how does it impact both individual developers, startups, and enterprises, and what could we learn about the gaps that are still needing to be closed that relates to Kubernetes. So huge numbers that people perceive really, really high value from Kubernetes as a project. It's pretty much the de facto container orchestration system in the world. 92% of organizations believing that it is impactful for their deployment. It's impactful for their software development practices. But importantly, and believing that it boosts deployment speed. But the study also revealed a number of gaps and identified things like the complexity of Kubernetes and other challenges. We were very pleased that as part of this research exercise, we asked a number of open text questions from our survey takers. What does Kubernetes mean to you? What does it mean to your career? And that's where we got qualitative insights that are captured throughout the report. There are 30 quotes in this report about what Kubernetes means to people. Being certified in Kubernetes allowed a person to get a new job, a raise, created incredible value for the startup, allowing it to innovate faster and become, in a better position for a potential exit. And what does it mean to the enterprise? So this is the kind of mixed methodology approach that we often like to use. And I think what's important is that we don't create research in a silo. At LF Research, we rely heavily on the non-code contributions from people like you, from the open source community, to take 10 minutes and tell us what you know. And then we share the insights out free for everybody in a report published under Creative Commons license, making the data sets available. So it's contributing to research together. It's by the community and for the community. So check out our Kubernetes Turns 10s report. Another piece of research that we did that's very useful within and beyond CNCF is our open source software developer report. This study was sponsored by Intel last year. And the motivations for this report were that there was a lack of evidence, there was a lack of data around the value that open source events had in the role of the open source software developer journey. That there was data out there that says, oh no, developers don't need to go to events. Well, that was specific to product developers. What we do to open source is explore the needs, the unique needs of the open source software developer. And the hypothesis was, knowing what we know about KubeCon, knowing the kind of attendees at these events, And the value that we all walk out of when we leave here and say, gosh, that was worthwhile. I'm so glad my organization gave me the opportunity to travel. That was captured empirically in this data and this report, demonstrating that yes, KubeCon is the most widely attended event, followed by Open Source Summit and PyCon, but that a huge number of respondents get value as it relates to their career development. They troubleshoot together, they problem solve together, they find inspiration, they learn about best practices here. They figure out how to problem solve with their counterparts at a different organization and really come together to learn about the latest threats, the latest solutions, and the latest projects that they should be collaborating in. And through empirical evidence, Intel was able to make the case to senior management to say, we need our open source software developers to travel. This is an investment that's worth making. These events are not just places to have fun, they provide real value to our team members. Go back. All right, where are we in this world of generative AI, and what's the state of convergence with cloud native? It was a big buzzword maybe a year and a half ago. Now it is legit for real, and to what extent? How were organizations approaching generative AI? This study, which was a collaboration between CNCF and LFAI and Data Foundation, explored the state, essentially, of generative AI and what was the role of cloud-native technologies within Gen AI product development. It was really interesting finding 84% of organizations have at least moderate, high or very high adoption of generative AI, and that those models are, Gen AI models are built and trained using cloud-based infrastructure. And of course, Kubernetes was showing up in 50% of the use cases for inference workloads. And another beauty of a finding was our ability to assess the value of a foundation as a mechanism to establish trust around a given technology, both from a license continuity and license certainty point of view, the benefit of open governance, but the importance of neutrality and having many eyes on a data set and many eyes understanding a model is hugely beneficial. So that was a really terrific study that still has a lot of legs, and sorry, I've got the wrong reference. Should be a different report linked at the bottom. Also last year, for the first time, CNCF hosted Cloud Native SecurityCon in June. And as so often happens at an event, we like to have fresh insights to share with our attendees. And we explored for the first time dynamics around cloud native security. And what was really interesting about this study is that how mature and how positive the findings were with the CNCF Cloud Native Security Study, the kind of positive trajectory compared to other industries, where I think because of the size of this community, the maturity of this community, and the extent to which there is a huge culture of collaboration around critical problems, that there's an optimism around progress and security that's present here at CNCF. And I think the culture, creating projects that have cultures of cybersecurity is hugely important. What we learned in this study was the extent to which organizations are reporting how much of their application development was on cloud native, challenges for vendors in terms of the ability to keep up with emerging threats, the number of security incidents that are being revealed, and the importance of CNCF best practices and the community constantly providing resources on how to deal with vulnerabilities is huge. So that should wrap, I think, what is some nice high-level data about what we know is taking place in cloud native? There's a whole bunch of stuff that we don't know, and there's a lot of data that we need, and this is where you come in. I'd love to hear more about data that will help you in your organization, data that will help drive decision making and get buy-in. Here's what we know we need, but we haven't yet had an opportunity to explore. Across all of our studies, there is this persistent contribution conundrum, where as we explore open source trends, we continually find a gigantic gap between open source use and upstream contribution. Not really a shocker, but the extent to which open source software is useful to organizations is widely understood. Everyone knows that it's 80 to 95% of any given software stack. It's prolific. The whole world economy runs on open source. But the value of contributing is very poorly understood. And consequently, we've seen layoffs by organizations who don't understand the value of keeping open source teams in place. And until we demonstrate that value numerically and be able to attach an ROI to upstream contribution, it becomes more difficult to make that case. In a global study at the end of 2023, the reasons why organizations experience that gap, there's just a lack of monetary return. There's this constant question that we get: what is the actual monetary ROI? And it's a really hard thing to measure, and I'll tell you why. We ask our community we have a mailing list of something like hundreds of thousands of open source contributors who we reach out to via email, which remains the best way to get survey sample. We have a very high engagement rate. But that group of respondents is highly qualified in understanding some of the technical questions, some of the technical trends, some of the technical needs. And what they cannot ascribe is the revenue that is derived from the products that they're building. That's the gap that is very, very difficult to close. And so we're looking at building a framework to better understand the contribution ROI. Other examples of things that we need are linking open source contribution to high performance teams. Recently, Chris Anazak said, hey, in your next survey, could you throw in a question there about the value of employing maintainers? And I was so pleased that when we got the results back, I could say, hey, Chris, 74% of organizations derive value, high value, from employing maintainers. That was not a question that we had any data around until recently. It's a question we're going to continue to ask. A qualitative comment came from a study a couple of years ago from the financial services sector around why engaging in open source is so important and why allowing our staff to contribute is so important. And as Mark Tate from JP Morgan says, it allows us to be positioned as a tech company, and that's how we go to market and hire people and bring the best talent, because you're going to have the most interesting projects to work on. I just need 20 more of those quotes from different organizations who get that same value. There are barriers to contributing that we know definitively, and it usually has to do with regulation and policy and concerns around, like, you know, in the financial services sector, it's the SEC and financial regulation. Highly regulated industries are typically the lowest in terms of their contribution rates. But I'd like to understand more around the value of inspiring your teams, keeping high performance teams, making sure that they are intrinsically motivated and rewarded in their organization. So this is where I'll ask you to get your questions ready. We have a mic. Let me check on our time. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes, and it's both questions and comments. You know, to understand what insights are really, really the most valuable to CNCF, to you, your organization. Here are just a few thought teasers. What's the state of contribution ROI specific to cloud native? How do we measure that? What are the most pervasive policies within your organization or legal barriers that prohibit your upstream contributions? What's the value of open source as it relates to talent management and retention? And do you have the skills you need in-house to compete in the new marketplace? How does contribution impact your corporate culture? Does it positively position your organization? I was so blown away a year ago when I attended a conference, right here in London. I attended a financial services conference with our our financial services project vertical. It's called FinTech Open Source Foundation. And their conference is called Open Source in Finance Forum. And in June last year, the head of BMO Capital Markets, BMO is a Canadian bank, and Kim Prado, who is in the Capital Markets group, shared a copy of BMO's annual report in which they had a box dedicated to their contributions in Finos. And they were using it as a marketing exercise to say that we are giving back. It was so important to them, and the fact that they were able to put their engagement in Finos in their annual report was nothing anybody had ever seen before and would never have predicted. So I'd love to know more if your organizations are branding yourselves as good stewards because of your support of open source projects and foundations. Cost of maintaining forks of projects. So this is a problem that plagues the financial services industry, where it's deemed to be safer to fork a project and manage it in-house than it is to contribute to that project upstream. And consequently, we have countless numbers of forked projects that are internally maintained. And so how many hours are your internal teams spending maintaining a project and having to go it alone instead of just getting that project from the latest version and being able to contribute back to it? It's a lot. And this was a hypothesis that came out of a leading US bank that said, I think we're maintaining way too many forks in this house. It's crazy, and we're wasting time and energy. But first of all, you need to count the projects that you forked in-house. Then you've got to add up the hours of maintaining those forks. It's a mystery, still to be solved. We're working on it, though. What are the monetary opportunities? How much are you actually saving in your vendor lock-in, or from your vendor lock-in scenarios by choosing to use open source projects instead? What does that look like? And in contract renegotiation, say, you know what, it's been great, but I know that there's an open source solution and it's cheaper for us to engage in that project, and we're going to save X, Y, and Z. So money drives a lot of decision making, and when money goes out the door, love goes out the window, and that's how it works for certain departments and functions, that it becomes cutthroat prioritization. So data helps drive the money. And so let us know how we can help create the data that's going to help you and your organization get the decisions made that you need to get made. So if anybody has any suggestions about other types of data that you need, feel free to saunter on up to the mic. We are building an ROI framework in spite of those obstacles of how difficult it is to understand the value. We're working on it. In which way do organizations benefit? Why is it valuable, and where? In terms of feature tracking and adding. When you pay an employee to spend time monitoring a project that your organization has taken a dependency on, and participate in the technical direction of that project to prevent it going somewhere you'd really rather it didn't go, how do we measure that value? It's actually can be very strategic and very important. What's the value around bug fixing? I know in the financial services sector, there were people who were burning to work on Log4j and like, fix it now, I can fix it sooner. They just wanted that opportunity to try to contribute a fix, and fast, but they couldn't. It was really, really frustrating because of their internal policies. And do you risk losing your team members so they go to an organization where they know they can contribute bug fixes because that's just their jam? That's what they want to do. What is we talked about the forks thing. Count that infrastructure. How many folks maintain fork projects in your organization? Can I have a show of hands? Yeah. And then what's the cost of those non-code contributions? Or sorry, what's the value of the non-code contribution when I allow my employee to attend a conference? When they can give a qualitative interview and be attributed for a research project. How much brand value are we getting out of that? Oh, there's thought leadership. Oh, we're showing up on LinkedIn. Oh, we're getting cited in academic papers. What's the share of voice that comes from that? Non-code contribution is a huge thing. I am a 100% non-code contributor, and every person who contributes to our research is providing a valuable non-code contribution. So if you've ever taken a survey that we've launched, if you've ever engaged in an interview, thank you. Thank you. It really, really helps us all, and I'm very personally grateful. We would not have 78 unique reports without our community giving us a little bit of their time. And then exploring the cost of employee turnover. We know that hiring is very, very costly. It's cheaper to upskill than it is to hire. And so you cannot hire your way out of your latest technological conundrum. But understanding to what extent it's cheaper is, to be determined. Tracy, you have a comment.
Well, I have a question, because you were asking about, what is important questions to answer. And I think one thing that has been on my mind, which is about adoption with the proliferation of CNCF projects and for what purpose, understanding a standardized adoption for what purpose in order to inform on my company's investment in particular open source projects. Are there either data ready or work towards that goal?
That's an excellent question, and it is a conundrum that we face in research, because right now we look at download data, but download data and adoption data are two different metrics. So we need to find better mechanisms to understand adoption and where and how. And I think as we go about modifying our surveys to understand to what extent you are using a given project in your product lines within your organization for internal operations management is really important, because it's not something that has been solved. So it's an excellent question about how we go about measuring usage. And if anybody has an ideas of how we should, we're all ears. How are we for time? Oh, 4:29, we have 1 minute. Okay, yeah, I think we were talking about filling that knowledge gap on contribution ROI. Any frameworks? I would just say open invitation. If you have ways that you're evaluating the ROI of open source within your organization and you want to share it, again, I'm all ears. Please let us know how we can build better frameworks, because we'll conduct those studies across our industries and across our project communities. There's a great appetite for this, and I think it's something we can all benefit from. How we can unlock greater insight into the value proposition of open source projects and open source foundations. I think one thing that serendipitously happened within open source as a result of license changing was illustrating, and this was not research-based, but it was illustrating the value of open governance. And so understanding the value of a foundation model as it relates to confidence in choosing an open source project and not having a rug pull risk is really important, and it's poorly understood. So I'm interested in doing more research on open governance and the foundation model. And with that, please explore the collection of research, linuxfoundation.org/research. If you're interested in getting in touch with us to conduct a unique study or to sponsor some of the studies that we do year over year, please get in touch. I can be reached at, this is a QR code to subscribe to our newsletter, where when we publish a new report or when we field a new survey, you get it right into your email inbox. And that way you'll be kept apprised of what is the latest research and what's the latest survey in the field. if you have surveys that you'd like us to publish on our website, send them. Be more than happy to put them up and encourage, sharing in this data generation exercise. I can be reached at hcarter@linuxfoundation.org, or you can just email research@linuxfoundation.org to stay in touch. So I think that's it. Yes, thank you, everybody.